Welcome, Baruch Haba. It's great to have you with us at College NFL.
Thank you. Thanks, Serviana. It's really an honor to be here. I have such a karas hatov, such gratitude for my training at Chovevei, Shivat Chovevei Torah. It's a privilege to even be here with one of my teachers, Rabbi Sascha Katz, and I'm privileged to be the opening act here. I'm so grateful for my time in the yeshiva, and grateful to Rabbi Weiss for founding it, and to Dov Weiss for recruiting me and being sort of the inspiration for it, because it was a special place, and it was special in lots of ways. But one of the ways in which it was special was that we had great Tanakh teachers. Rev Natty Helfgott really shaped my thinking around how we study Tanakh, that is the Hebrew Bible, the Torah, and the later books of the Bible. And that was a great delight and comfort to me, because I think I had been in yeshiva but before then, and always felt like I didn't have such a Talmud cup. Like I wasn't so great at Gemara. I didn't have I wasn't as successful in that regard, but I always loved Tanakh, and I always wanted to study, especially the Chumash, especially the weekly parsha, and then the Midrash, and then its commentaries. And that was always my passion. That was always what I loved. But I remember when I was first in yeshiva, it was sort of like sneaking that material on the side or after Seder. And at Chovevei, there was really space to go deep into Gemara learning, and also to go deep into the narrative side of our, if Gemara, of course, Gemara has narrative in it too, Talmud has narrative in it too, but the narrative, the whole narrative side of our tradition. That is to say, if the Talmud is primarily legal, or a bulk of it is legal, then you might imagine the Midrash as sort of like the counterpoint to the Talmud. Same era, same guys, but instead of thinking about the laws of our tradition, thinking about the stories of our tradition. I say all that because I'm grateful that I had a school that went deep in both of those kind of classic literature types in our tradition, but also because what I want to study with you tonight is also going to play a little bit with that divide between the legal and the narrative, between what we might call the halacha and the agadah, because what I want to look at with you tonight is really my favorite part, always has been my favorite part of the Haggadah, and of the Magid section of the Haggadah, the storytelling section, which already that should already like cue your ear a little bit, because it's Magid and Haggadah, so you already have a sense of where we're going here. The narrative, the great narrative that we tell on Passover. I always love this section of the Arba Banim, the four sons, the four children. In part because it just seemed like a brilliant example of our ancient pedagogy, our tradition's real deep pedagogical thinking, what we might call in the language of modern pedagogy, personalized learning. But once I began to understand on a little bit of a deeper level what I sort of became obsessed with the whole tradition of commentary. And I think I think the right thing is to promote my book a little bit. So I'll just put this in the chat. I wrote this book on Parshanut, called Parshanut, and that, as I said, really was my great passion, is studying the Torah and its commentary, starting with the Midrash and on the way down. Once I began to go deeper in that literature, I suddenly understood, though it's obvious. I mean, it's obvious, as we'll soon see, just from the text of the Haggadah itself, but that the section of the Haggadah that we call the four children, the four sons, is a magnificent piece of Midrash. I mean, it just as a Midrash, and just as a work of parshanut, meaning a work of attempting to grapple with the text of the Torah that first gives us our story. This section is doing that and says that it's doing that explicitly as it opens. Kneged arba banim dibra Torah. The Torah speaks regarding for children. So, in other words, this section is telling us right away we're going to interpret the Torah and show you how the Torah, if we take all of the words of the Torah into account, the Torah produces this this narrative. And often we think of midrash as narrative that the rabbis came up with. But once you begin to study it deeply, you realize they're always responding to the text itself. There are always cues in the text of the Torah itself that the midrash is picking up on, and it's very important to the composers of the midrash that they show where in the text they're getting their in this case, where are they getting their four sons? Where do these four sons come from? So here's a source sheet that we're going to use tonight to take a look at the here. That should work for everybody, and I'll screen share it, but some people like to have it on the side. But let's just start with the section of the four sons here. And as I said, it begins Kneged arba banim dibra Torah. The Torah speaks regarding to four children. So how does the Torah speak regarding four children? Okay, so there are four types. One who is wise, one who is wicked, one who is simple, and one who does not know how to ask. Echad chacham, ve'echad rasha, ve'echad tam, ve'echad she'eno yodea lishol. It's that last one that we're going to think mostly about tonight. So keep this one in mind, because it's a strange category. And I want to return to this to think why we even have this category. But let's go through the text of the arba banim here, of the four children, and see where in the Torah they're getting these four types from. So chacham mahu omer. What does the wise one say? Ma ha'edut va'chukim va'mishpatim asher tzifa Hashem Elokeinu etchem. What are the testimonies, the rules, and the laws which the Lord our God has commanded you? Now, okay, you can see the citation here. That's over in Deuteronomy. And, this question sounds very legalistic, very interested in the law. And so were our rabbis. And so they like that. And this sounds like a good, smart kid. And so this is the wise kid. And what do you say to the wise kid? You instruct him in the laws of Passover, Hilchot HaPesach, up to the law of one is not to finish with the afikomen after the Passover lamb. Ein maftirin achara Pesach afikomen. Okay, so getting very technical. This is drawn actually from the Mishnah. This is a law, but it's like a law that we get from rabbinic literature. So we're really deep in the legal discussion, and that's the wise son. The wise son is the one who's interested in the laws. Okay, the wicked one, what does he say? Ma'avoda hazot lachem. What is this service to you? To you, as you know what's coming, but the rabbis don't like that to you language. What do you mean to you? Why not to all of us? And so this is what they make of that language. He says to you, but he doesn't say to him. By excluding himself from the community, he has denied that which is fundamental. Kafar be'ikar. You therefore blunt his teeth and say to him, Ba'avur ze asa Hashem li, is because of this that the Lord did for me, but say to Mitzrayim, li v'lo lo, for me and not for him. For had he been there, he would not have been saved. Okay, now I just want to point out, as we're soon going to go pan out a little bit and see how this midrash here is constructed from the Torah, but just take a look at the citations here and you'll see that the question is in a different chapter than the answer. Okay, so that's not the direct answer that we give to this question in the Torah, but we'll get there. Okay, let's move on now to the simple child. Hatam, Mahu Omer, Mazot. Simple child, simple question. What is this? What is very okay? So there are children who are a little less sophisticated. So fine, to them too, we have to think, how do we tell the story? And we say to them something very simple, something very basic. B'chozek yad hotzianu Hashem mitzrayim mi beit avadim. With the strength of his hand did the Lord take us out from Egypt, from the house of bondage. Okay. So those are the three categories, and they're drawn, as we'll soon see. And this is really the critical point here. They're drawn from three places in the Torah where we are telling the story of Egypt, and three places in the Torah where we have a child asking about the story of Egypt. Okay, now here's the fourth kid. V'she'eno yadei lishol. And as for the one who does not know how to ask, at patachlo, you must open the topic for him because he doesn't ask, so you have to start. As it is said, v'yigadete levincha bayom hahu. As it is said, you shall tell your child on that day. It is because of this that the Lord did for me when I left Egypt. Okay. And that's a famous line there. V'yigadete levincha. That is, in fact, the source for the very idea that we are obligated to tell this story to our children. It also, by the way, is the same answer that we gave above to the wicked child, right? Same verse there, same answer. Okay, so that's a little funny, but okay, that child didn't ask. I want to just stop here for a minute and just think with you all, who is this kid? Why did we need another category of a child who doesn't know how to ask? We already have a simple child, so it's not the same as that. We have another kid who doesn't know how to ask. Is he more simple, or is this some other? Let's just take a moment to realize that that's an odd fourth category. And I wonder if anyone has any. I'm going to pause a couple times. We have only a brief time together, so I'll mostly just share with you. But any thoughts on the significance of the child who doesn't know how to ask?
People can feel free to place observations into the chat, and we will see them. The group will not see them, but the hosts will see them. So Rabbi Kasher will see what you write, and he can respond there.
All right, fair enough. Okay, so I'm putting that out there as a question. I won't just hang in the air until but if you have something, give it to me, because I want to just start there by just pointing out that that's a strange category. And why do we have this category of the one who doesn't know how to ask? Now there is a technical, it's strange just as a category, but there is a technical answer to the question, which is that we talk about, as we already saw in little clipped version, but as we'll soon see, we talked about 4 different places in the Torah that speak of telling the story of Egypt. And in 3 of those places, we had a kid asking about the story of Egypt, or asking something, to which a parent responded, let me tell you a little bit about the Passover story. Okay, so there are four places in our Torah where we tell the story of Egypt, but there are 3 out of those 4 are preceded by a question, and 1 is not. So in the place that is not preceded by a question, it must be there was a kid there that didn't know how to ask. So there's a logic to it. Again, the Midrash is always interested in hanging its argument on the structure of the text, and that's true here too. In a very obvious way, it's 3 out of 4. So there are 3 questions, 3 kids that know how to ask, and instead of saying that, well, sometimes we don't wait for a child to be around, we create a child that doesn't know how to ask. Okay, so that's to a certain extent a technical answer, but even that it's sort of a strange move. Because as I said, the verse that we're using to justify telling the child who doesn't know how to ask is this verse, which again is the very source for the whole idea of our obligation to teach these things to children. V'yigadete levincha. So we could have easily said, well, that's the principle, and the other examples teach us about these three children, but we've got a 4th. Okay, all right. So I've seen questions actually now come in the chat. Someone who has not been trained to ask a question. Okay, so someone who might not be simple, but is not initiated, hasn't been inducted into this tradition of question asking. Or I see the parentheses also, has been taught to silently figure out what is happening. So maybe also a certain kind of child with a certain kind of life experience that has learned to keep quiet, a certain personality type, certain response to the world around. And Deborah says, the Rasha asks, what does this mean to you in the plural? Why does he ask in the plural? Why doesn't the text say lecha? I'm not sure I totally understand that, but I want to stick for a minute with the child who doesn't know how to ask. So let me now pan out a little bit. Let me pan out and just take us through. We saw it in brief, but I just want to take us through the places where in our Torah this midrash that's in our Haggadah is drawing from. So the first, and most of them are in Exodus, in Parshat Bo, in chapters 12 and 13 of Exodus, but the first one actually comes from much later, from Deuteronomy. So let's start there. Now, where are we in Deuteronomy? Well, Deuteronomy itself is Moshe giving his kind of farewell speech and mapping out for the children of Israel as they're about to cross over into the land of Canaan, the land that will become Israel. And he's giving them a whole system of new laws that will structure a whole new society. And he's also giving them a speech and telling them what to remember and what to think about. And in fact, this chapter in Deuteronomy, we're picking up in verse 20, but just verses earlier, we had the Shema in it. Shema Yisrael, the Hero Israel, the great prayer that we say twice daily. That was in this chapter as well. So there's a lot coming their way. And as Moshe is talking to them, he mentions the telling of the Passover story. And he says, when in time to come your children ask you, Hishalcha bincha machar lemor. And here comes the wise child's question. What are these testimonies, the rules and laws which the Hashem, our God, has commanded you? Now, what do we say to the wise child? You shall say to your children, we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and Hashem freed us from Egypt with a mighty hand. Hashem brought before our eyes marvelous and destructive signs and portents in Egypt against Pharaoh and all his household. And God freed us from there in order to take us and give us the land and promised on oath to our fathers. Then Hashem commanded us to observe all these laws, to revere our God for our lasting good and for our survival, as is now the case. It will therefore be to our merit before our God to observe faithfully this whole mitzvah as God has commanded us. Okay. Now, I want to just point out there that was a very legal question, and so this is a legally minded and therefore wise child, but the answer wasn't very legal. The answer wasn't the answer that the Midrash borrows from the Mishnah, but actually the answer is pretty basic. God took me out of Egypt. The answer is not an explanation of how all the laws work, but the reason behind all of the laws. So we can already feel that the Midrash is doing a little bit of like fancy work, reframing the nature of the discussion between the wise child and his parent. Okay, so on the one hand, the Midrash is definitely drawing from these places in the Torah, but on the other hand, we're seeing a little bit of work to kind of give them a character that we might not have assumed just from reading the text of the Torah. Okay, so that's the wise child. What about the wicked child? The one who said that this service was for you and not for him. Where's that child come from? Well, that child comes from, that's actually the first child that we encounter. That child comes from chapter 12 of Exodus, which is the famous chapter that begins, Achodesh hazeh lechem rosh chadashim. This is it. This is the month, and this is going to be the month in which you always celebrate Passover. And this happens as the children of Israel are leaving Egypt in the midst of the Exodus. All of a sudden, everything stops, and God explains to Moshe that there's going to be a ritual, that they're going to have to take a lamb this night in order to preserve, in order to save them during this Passover, but also that this is going to ultimately be a rite that will be observed for generations. But the first thing that Moshe does is just instructs the Israelites there and then what they have to do right there and then. And that's where we're picking up here in chapter 12. So Moshe then, Vayikra Moshe lechol ziknei Yisrael, Moshe then summoned all the elders of Israel and said to them, go pick out lambs for your families and slaughter the Passover offering. Take a bunch of hyssop, dip it into the blood that's in the basin, and apply some of the blood that's in the basin to the lintel and to the doorsteps. None of you shall go outside. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you get the feeling here. All of exactly what you're going to have to do this night, and put the blood on your door. And then eventually you'll observe this same kind of ritual for all time when you enter the land that God will give you. And when your children ask you then, Ma avodah zot lechem, you shall say, it is the Passover sacrifice to God, who passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when smiting the Egyptians, but saved our houses. Vet batenu hitzil. And those assembled then bowed low in homage. Okay, so first of all, it's kind of interesting, again, just to note that this is the wicked child. But, well, first of all, the wicked child seems interested in the laws that are being explained. And so though we imagined that it was the wise child who was really legalistic, it's the wicked child who is observing all of these laws and asking about them. He did say to you, but the response, just so we note, the response included an us for our houses. So the response in the Torah was not to exclude this child. So that's a move that the rabbis are making. What is this service to you? And not only that, but this is also a to you. And this is also a to you. What are the edut v'achukim mishpatim asher tziva Elokeinu etchem to you? So the move to make this child the wicked child again seems like a decision. A decision. We almost want a wicked child. Okay. So that brings us to the last chapter where these four children are coming, and very soon to the child who doesn't know how to ask. But first, again, there's the simple child, and just so we really understand this midrash, let's see the simple child in context as well. That simple child comes from Exodus chapter 13, and Exodus chapter 13, Moshe is continuing to explain how the children of Israel will observe the Passover practice in the future. And he explains that 7 days they shall eat matzah, and on the seventh day there will be a festival to God, and no chametz shall be eaten. And then the famous line, and you shall tell your child on that day, it is because of this that God did for me when I left Egypt. Now we're going to return to this verse because this is the verse that the child who doesn't know how to ask is sort of hanging on. But let's move a little bit further now in chapter 13. And it turns out we're talking about something very specific. When God has brought you into the land of the Canaanites, as God swore to you and your fathers, and has given it to you, you shall set apart for God every first issue of the womb, every male firstling that your cattle drops shall be God's. But every firstling ass you shall redeem with a sheep. If you do not redeem it, you must break its neck. And you must redeem every male firstling, firstborn among your children. Okay, so this idea that the firstborn of all of your livestock and that your firstborn will be dedicated to God, that's what's being explained here now in the midst of chapter 13. And this is a sort of a new idea. It's a very specific law that all of a sudden Moshe is introducing. And all of a sudden, as Moshe is introducing it, he says, and when in time to come, a child of yours asks you, what is this? In other words, what is going on here with this dedication of these animals? You shall reply, it is with a mighty hand that God brought us out from Egypt, the house of bondage. When Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, Hashem slew every male firstborn in the land of Egypt, the firstborn of both human and beast. Therefore, I sacrifice to Hashem every first male issue of their womb, but redeem every male firstborn among my children. Okay, so that's just like, there's the third kind of contextual look at the third child, where we see that, okay, maybe he's simple, but it actually seems to be asking about something very specific, and in fact, once again, legalistic. And the answer he gets is a lot more detailed than the answer that we give to the simple child in the Haggadah. Okay, so here are the three places, and they look a little different in their original sourcing. And so we can see how they've been kind of reconstituted to produce these three types. Okay, that is just by way of the Torah, of moving from the Torah itself to the parshanut that the Midrash is doing to produce this Arba Banim text that we have in front of us. That finally brings us to She'eno Yedei Lishol, the child who doesn't know how to ask. And as I said, the child who doesn't know how to ask is rooted in the fact that with all of these other tellings of the story, we had a question that preceded it. But with this most central telling of the story, and I think that should say you shall tell your child on that day, it is because of this that God did for me when I left Egypt. V'yigadeta levincha b'yom hahu. There's no question that precedes it. And so that's the child that doesn't know how to ask. Okay. Now, I did all of this. This is just a running, taking a running start to bring us to this beautiful Rashi. This is really what I wanted to share with you today, because this Rashi is going to give us some explanation for the idea that this is the verse that produces the child who doesn't know how to ask. Now, again, we have a technical reason. There's no question before it, but Rashi sees something in this verse that tells us not just about the child who's sitting before us, but about the way we tell the story. So here's what Rashi says. This is about the child who doesn't know how to ask. And the verse is teaching you Shetiftachlo ata b'divrei agadah, that you should open for him with words of agadah, hamoshchin et halev, that draw forth the heart. Okay. So now, as you can see, Rashi is drawing from the Mechilta, one of our primary midrashim on the book of Exodus. And it is that midrash that puts together the four sons for us, including the one who doesn't know how to ask. But the midrash only gives us this phrase here, shetiftach lo ata. In fact, in the midrash, I'll scroll back up. The language in the Aramaic is exactly as it appears here in the four sons. At patach lo, you must open the topic for him. But Rashi adds some words for us. Rashi says, you should open for him b'divrei agadah, with words of agadah. And again, this is our word for the narrative side of our tradition, the storytelling side of our tradition. With words of agadah that draw forth the heart. Hamoshchin et halev. Okay. So first of all, this is I just want to point out that this, using the language of agadah, you can see why Rashi is introducing that language, because agadah is related and is the Aramaic for Haggadah, the name for the telling of the story in our Passover Seder. And that is the language of this verse here, V'yigadeta. So there's some hint in the verse here that we should tell, and we should tell using narrative, using agadah, as opposed to halacha. And then Rashi adds, because words of agadah moshchin et halev, they draw forth the heart. So I want to stop here again and just consider that phrase with you a little bit. I mean, there's really two questions here. One question is why does the one who doesn't know how to ask need words of Agadah, need words of narrative, of story rather than law? Why is Rashi emphasizing that? And why do those words in particular draw forth the heart? I wonder if anyone has any thoughts on that question. What is it about the narrative, the storytelling side of our tradition that moshchin et halev, that draws forth the heart in a way that's different from the other esteemed, the wise son part of our tradition, the halacha? Any thoughts on that? And I guess Yona will deliver them.
Again, please place things into the chat if you'd like us to read them at this time, either directly to Rabbi David Kasher.
Oh, I can. Yeah, I guess I can read them. So Adela says, storytelling makes topics accessible. So I want us to think about that. I want us to think about what the function, because what we're able to consider here is the function of Agadah in our tradition more broadly. Right? We're thinking about these kids and the different ways that kids learn, but what is the function of Agadah for all of us? And Adela's comment that storytelling makes topics accessible might suggest that Agadah is sort of is the thing which draws us into this tradition. Now, halacha is what's waiting to be learned in the tradition, but maybe it's Agadah that creates accessibility. The story, Eva says, a story is relatable. You can identify with the folks in the story, right? So does the child who doesn't know how to ask, does the child feel a sense of connection to any of this? We were worried because we had a wicked child who said, for you, and not for him. We were worried about that possibility, that a child wouldn't feel connected to all of this, right? So what's going on behind this silent child? What's hanging out there behind the eyes? So maybe we tell a story and we see if we can create some sense of connection, some sense of relation. Laura says, we open with, this is the bread of affliction, very visceral. And Rabbi Katz says, storytelling engages the emotions, the passions, and the desire to be engaged, involved. Okay, that's another great way to think about it. That is,
it's just me copying a quote from someone else. It's not me saying it. Someone sent it to me. Sorry.
So who said?
I don't know.
So copying from someone else. Very, very nice. So another way, whoever it was that said this, one way we can think about halacha and agadah is that there is the kind of intellectual, mental, cognitive side of our tradition, the working through the details and analyzing the system, and then there is the emotional, the part of our tradition that is speaking, as Rashi says, directly to the heart. Okay, I'm running out of time here, so these are great answers. And we can continue to think about what it means that Agadah is the thing that we use to engage that child who we haven't understood yet, and we don't know where they're coming from. We don't know what it'll take to draw them in. So we start with words of Agadah, and after all, words of Agadah are related to words of Haggadah. The whole thing is the Haggadah. And in a sense, there's a reason why it's the Haggadah. There's a reason why we're not just teaching halachot the whole night. Because we are thinking that everyone who's at our Seder table might be the one who doesn't know how to ask, might be the one who isn't sure where all this is coming from and hasn't yet made it a commitment or a decision or a relation or connection to all of this. And so, patach lo b'divrei Agadah. So we open with words of story in order to draw people in, because if nothing else, that is what story and what the whole narrative side of our tradition is up to, is drawing people in. I want to just end with this great teaching from a Kasher Yid, a very important Jew of the 20th century, who taught in the law school at Yale, Robert Cover. And Robert Cover has this amazing essay, Nomos and Narrative. Nomos being the legal, and then this other concept, narrative, and as you can hear it that way, it maps nicely onto our halacha agada binary, and this is what Cover said. He said, no set of legal institutions or prescriptions exists apart from the narratives that locate it and give it meaning. For every constitution, there is an epic. For each decalogue, a scripture. And once understood in the context of the narratives that give it meaning, law becomes not merely a system of rules to be observed, but a world in which we live. And I think this language of locating it and giving it meaning, this is the language that I think that we're tapping into when we open with words of Agadah, that we're, for the one who doesn't know how to ask, for the one who's just starting this journey, we have to locate them and to give them a sense of the meaning of it all. As we can see from all the other places in the Torah, a lot of this is about passing on a tradition that's filled with rituals and rules and laws and details and prescriptions. But we have to be drawn in with the narrative, the backdrop that gives us a sense of the meaning and the place of it all, and therefore gives us a sense of meaning and place in our tradition and in our world. So that's 542, and I'll end there.